Hello. Today I will talk about Peter Bruegel the Elder and his significant contributions to art history. Peter Bruegel the Elder was a renowned and highly influential Flemish painter in the art world during the period of the early Renaissance. Perhaps one of his most famous paintings is the Tower of Babel. The painting is not just a complete mystery. Truly understanding it will help you grasp the astonishing world around us. I will talk about the Tower of Babel, share insights on several other paintings by Peter Bruegel the Elder, and reveal what is probably his main secret. Now, firstly, the first painting we will start with is the famous artwork entitled the painting Misanthrope. Peter Bruegel the Elder painted this picture a year before his death, which occurred in 1569. This painting is beautiful simply because it is full of mysteries. Look. What is depicted on this canvas? A certain traveler is walking. The face of this traveler is hardly visible to us, as both his face and his entire body are hidden by a cloak. On the path of the traveler lie spikes and obstacles, special traps that are carefully and meticulously crafted, designed to make it harder to pass. Behind him is a strange figure who, while walking, is cutting the scarf and wallet with money from this traveler. And for some inexplicable reason, this particular cutter is actually located inside of the sphere, on the very top of which is a cross. This alone makes the painting incredibly strange because, no, wait. We all know the rules of socialist realism. Here is a plot from life draw. It, and you will indeed find happiness. For some reason, Bruegel needed to depict this sphere within which is this thief. After all, this must mean something. It didn't just come to the artist's mind like, hey, I'm an artist, I see it this way, I'll depict some kind of ball, it will beautify this painting. Does it mean something? The signature made under the painting, since the world is treacherous, I enter into mourning. Yes, it's true that they say this was not done by Bruegel, but was added later. However, the text still leaves some misunderstanding about how this is related to the plot. Well, yes, the world is treacherous, there is scum all around. That's why I put on a hood and went into mourning. Perhaps, but somehow it still feels insufficient to explain what is actually depicted in the painting. And the title is Misanthrope. The literal translation of the word misanthrope is a person who, in its purest form, harbors a deep-seated hatred for humanity, a dislike for people as they are, a dislike for their natural flaws. What do we truly see right before us? Indeed, in fact, this painting illustrates almost the main aspect that defined life back then, in the Middle Ages. In general, this is the relationship between religion, God, faith, people, and the church as we understand it, and how they interact with each other. Who is this mysterious traveler, whose journey is fraught with challenges, and whose path is lined with thorny obstacles, and who is shrouded in a cloak of mystery and intrigue? And this is certainly a biblical text. The text is hidden from us by allegories, a text that certainly has a deep meaning. But this meaning is not immediately visible at first glance. It is not obvious. And there is one who is always present and who always remains near to this text, the church. But the church has one particular feature besides, well, naturally, that very cross they always hide behind. There is a certain belief system about the literal understanding of everything written in the biblical text. Read it as it is written. It is said that it was, so it was. Do not look for something deeper than the literal, straightforward understanding. It is said, love one another, so that's it. Do not read the next sentence, as it may spoil your impression of the previous one. You cannot piece everything together. It won't stick anyway. Read in fragments. Explain everything separately. The church seizes the literal, direct, surface level and tangible material aspects of this text in a manner that is both essentially, inherently, and effectively stealing money from it. She indeed steals the material, leaving all that is truly spiritual there, under this cloak. This church does not interest her, because the church essentially sits inside this little sphere, an entirely closed sphere of literal understanding, completely. The ball is transparent. You can't even see it from the side. It seems like, so what is so bad about this literal understanding? The only really bad thing is that it creates an invisible boundary beyond which you cannot go. You are always sitting inside, and you cannot understand the meaning because from inside the sphere, that meaning is not visible. And there is a text that follows its own path because it has a colossal purpose. Because this text is the Savior, and it must traverse a long millennial journey, a journey of thousands of years, along which there are thorns set for it, dangers, humiliations, thorns that must be overcome. And do you see that crooked, bent tree in the background? Bent so much that it is incredibly astonishing how it stands? This is that crooked world, a world where everything is understood literally. And this traveler goes past this crooked world, and there is a church. And this church always has its flock that it tends. Look, in the beautiful and picturesque background, we have a shepherd who is peacefully tending to his sheep, which are grazing. Here is the important role of the church as shepherds. But there is also another character who may be the main one in this painting, and who is not immediately visible. However, which is on one hand so incredibly small, and on the other hand so incredibly vast that we do not notice it. That is, here, a brief digression is indeed necessary. There is indeed one of the most important biblical symbols. This is a cherub. What is its nature? Look, this is what a scroll looks like, approximately like this. The scroll of the Pentateuch looks, or should look like this, because its true appearance is currently lost, as the true appearance is described in this very text, described allegorically, and if we restore it, we obtain. Look, here is, as you can see, a beautiful illustration on the discs of this scroll, round discs, and on these round discs, the illustration is that of a cherub. Its focus is on the same construction. Two circles, a check mark between them, and a smiley face. This emoji can give various different interpretations depending on how you look at it. As is known, the Kurogema has 4 faces. This is the face of a man, the face of an eagle, the face of a lion, the face of a bull. These are the 4 faces. You will see eyebrows in this little triangle. You will see a person, you will see this beak, you will see an eagle, you will see horns, and it will become a bull. And if you see the face of a lion, then you will get such an animal. The same thing can, in essence, turn into entirely and utterly different things depending on the point of view of interpretation. This is indeed the key to understanding the biblical text. This is the nature of the cherubim. And do you understand what the thing is? That this cherub, on one hand, kills this text and makes it unreadable, but on the other hand, it is precisely he who later resurrects it. Do you remember the phoenix which must burn and then rise from the ashes? This is what this biblical text is about. It must burn. It must be completely and utterly destroyed in order to be preserved, because it speaks of things about misanthropy. It tells that people deeply suffer from original sin in its essence and nature. And this original sin is to see the banal, the simple, the understandable in everything, to strive for this simplicity. This is a sin that kills complexity, kills the philosophy of meaning, kills the narrative of meaning, of how it is structured, kills every time, constantly kills, as soon as it is reborn. And so there exists a vast history of humanity that leads people to the moment of the Messiah's arrival, to this very text and its understanding. And the cherub, who is indeed both a killer and a creator of this flock, which truly and completely, in a literal sense, consumes everything from these fields that the church offers him. And on the other hand, the one who resurrects this text, which contains all its wealth. So look here. As you can clearly observe, you see the windmill is the main symbol of the cherubim, which is quite significant. Don Quixote, who fought with windmills, found it not so easy. Why the windmill indeed? Well, first of all, the cherub, the star, essentially, in a sense, somewhat resembles the blades of this mill. But the main symbol, the meaning that was monolithic in this text, was, in a way, inherently related to when it was understood. It was ground into flour because now every word has multiple meanings and they do not stick together. The unbearable suffering from which you can inevitably take, and eventually, ultimately, everything crumbles to dust. A mill, but it's a mill. It's a cherub, the one who brings everything together. And so the painting has a shape that is not typical for Peter Bruegel the Elder, being round. No, he did this a few times, but most of his paintings are not round. And suddenly this painting is round, so this circle of the painting is indeed a reference to the disk of light, to the cherub, which is indeed present in this painting twice. One time it is the extremely mill that in fact creates this religion, and the second time it is the restoring cherub, which truly contains all the richness of meanings. This is, in essence, the kind of painting Bruegel created. And you will surely ask, how is it that Bruegel, having created dozens of works in his oeuvre, suddenly decided to take a stroll through the church? Did you know that actually, as a matter of fact, indeed, you see, all of Bruegel's paintings were really about this? Let's take a look at a few more, where perhaps, although no, it can be said that these qualities are more vividly expressed in these paintings. Each painting is unique in its own way. Do you remember Hieronymus? The same thing can be viewed from different angles. Here, Bruegel looks at the same story of our world from his perspective in each of his remarkable works. And here is the subsequent painting. Please, take a look. The blind lead the blind, as they often say. After all, ultimately, what happens if this text is misunderstood? What happens if the meaning is indeed lost? And what happens if a certain church takes upon itself the right, the monopoly right, to interpret what is written there? We will explain everything to you now. The blind lead the blind. But there are several details in this painting that you must see to fully appreciate it. This painting is a masterpiece with intricate elements. Each brushstroke and color choice contributes to its overall beauty. Do you remember that cherub? It all depends on how we see this little corner. And if you turn it upside down, by the way, it resembles the letter V, which is probably well known to everyone now. And this little corner, one of these corners, defines the literal understanding. And here they are walking against the backdrop of a house, the roof of which is that very little corner. And if we look closely, we will be surprised to find nothing at all, just one roof. Built at an angle. By the way, there is another allegory of the cherubim described in the biblical text, which is a flat roof. What obscures the content from us is that, in essence, a flat reference to the fact that direct reading is always unembellished and flat and literal. This little corner is indeed the background against which the blind are walking. There is one very important thing. The biblical text is divided into the Old Testament and the New Testament. The New Testament is written in Greek, while the Old Testament, the main part of the biblical text, is written in Hebrew with a slight infusion of Aramaic. The Jurat is written in its script, in a consonantal manner, that is, using only consonant letters. And how to read the words? There are plenty of options, so let's insert the vowels. In fact, this does not significantly hinder reading the text, because from the overall meaning and context, it is clear how to read it, since Jews still write consonantally, and this does not cause particular problems. But names. There are over 2,000 names in this text, names and place names, and each name, depending on how you arrange the letters, will yield a different result. As you name the yacht, so it will sail. You see, as you might already know, the story goes that it is extremely crucial to pronounce names correctly and with great care. The focus of the biblical text is that Hebrew itself was originally created as an artificial language. The military Hebrew is designed in such a way that the same words needed for this text can be read differently as names. And at that moment, they will in great detail, with great precision, describe what phenomenon is being referred to. But since the appearance of this text, a tradition has emerged called oral transmission on how to read this text and how to read it correctly. And then it became established. In the Greek translation, these names were already recorded in their supposedly correct pronunciation. Then the Masoretic vocalization appeared, which fixed everything unambiguously, and we consider it only in this way. And at that moment, it indeed became impossible to understand what lay behind these characters. If you happen to carry along with you some music that has already been proclaimed through this reading, then it is likely that you will not be able to get anywhere. This is because the music having been. Therefore pay careful attention to the moment when the blind indeed begin to fall into the ditch. The first thing that falls in is this musical instrument that they also carry with them, because the blind carry with them the Masoretic vocalization, and it is this music in particular that is indeed to blame for their blindness, specifically. This is part of this project, part of the concept. This is essentially what Bruegel depicted here. Nevertheless, the attempts to understand the text always remain. And so, let's take a look at the painting Hunters in the Snow in detail and explore its elements. This painting is interesting not only because it showcases the brushwork of Peter Bruegel the Elder, but also because it appears in great modern films. It features in Tarkovsky's Solaris. Later, it appears in Lars von Trier's film Melancholia, which is, what is it about this painting that has earned it a place in the greatest films? And what is actually depicted here? Well, the hunters, they are returning from the hunt. The dogs are running alongside them. There are some insignificant details in the background if you look closely. So, as we mentioned earlier, attempts to understand this text never cease. By the way, a film titled Solaris was made about the attempts to understand this text. Solaris, sunny, is indeed how we tend to call that, which is clear to you. The Church believes this text is indeed understandable if taken literally. It is bright and sunny. But for some reason, it does not lend itself to an analysis of meaning. What is right there inside under this sun? And in Solaris, this orbital station is described, which revolves around a planet with a sentient ocean. The text discusses the workings of the brain, of consciousness, and so the station, desperate attempts, and already the disappointment of humanity. And at the station, there are 3 scientists left, and the 4th, who arrives there, is Chris, who must make the decision whether to continue these studies or to close the station. And when he finally arrives at the scene, Giborian is already dead by that time, and only 2 remain. And then in a surprising twist, it turns out that each of them, in a manner that is both unexpected and delightful, receives guests sent by this wise ocean. Moreover, the guests are not just any guests, but indeed guests from your subconscious, guests that embody your experiences, fears, and perhaps the most vivid and memorable events in your life. You see, as you may know, this text, the biblical text, is often referred to as another name, the mirror. By the way, Tarkovsky, who directed Solaris, also made Mirror. But why mirror? And because when you do not understand what the text is about, your own personal thoughts inevitably and naturally come to you when you enter it. You seize those certain details that resonate with what you brought with you, and you take away a reflection from there, a reflection of your own consciousness, your own subconscious. You do not see true allegories. You only see a mirror, indeed, a reflection of yourself. That is why the vast and mysterious ocean sends forth these unexpected and intriguing guests. The film itself is actually a retelling of a parable, or as they are called in the Talmud, a midrash. It is about 4 rabbis who entered the Pardes, and as they entered, one of them, Rabbi Akiva, said that upon seeing the slabs of pure marble, there is no need to shout, "Water, water." Then the first rabbi died, the second went mad, the third began to tear the sprouts, and only the fourth, the very Rabbi Akiva, entered in peace and came out from Pardes, which is the Garden of Eden, as it is customary to call the biblical text, again, with an emphasis on the fact that there are several levels of interpretation. And so 4 figures entered there. One passed away, the second lost his mind, the third started tearing at the sprouts. It was a tragic event. Wait, this is a description of those at this station. The first Gibberean died, then the 2 remaining scholars, one of whom is researching, while the other is constantly losing his mind, and which ultimately helped Kelvin successfully get rid of the mysterious Hari, who unexpectedly comes to him from his guest. So what is this intriguing story about? So these rabbis, they are not 4 different rabbis. They are the same person, just at different moments of understanding this text. At first you come in and initially comprehend absolutely nothing. You die, then all sorts of bizarre ideas come to your mind and you go crazy. Then you start to grasp certain key moments that can potentially lead to the unraveling of this text. You begin to gradually and carefully tear at the sprouts, and only if you go through all these stages thoroughly will you enter in a peaceful manner and then ultimately take the whole world completely and fully from there. This is how the study of this text is often described. But the main thing you must do to descend there, to the surface of Solaris, is to rid yourself of the most precious thing, your previous experience and understanding. Because as we all grow a little older, we acquire a bunch of views on this world and beliefs that we know how it is arranged. We know that the Bible is a compilative work written by ancient, not very educated people who gathered bits and pieces from various sources, combining some tales and stories absurdly into one large text. Then, being not very wise again, they created a religion from this, began to worship it, and religion served the people, making it very convenient to keep everyone else in subjection, taking on authority over others. The functions of rulers, and for some the functions of clergymen, thus formed a stable conglomeration, colloquially referred to as a gang, which led humanity for hundreds of years. Well, not quite like that. It's much more complicated. You have been deceived. You were presented with a much better fur. And so, we need to understand this text. And what about the painting? What is depicted in it? And it describes how people are trying, in a multitude of various ways, to comprehend and interpret this text. Hunters. These are indeed those who truly come to this text seeking understanding, and they return from it with nothing completely. With a solitary forest, a deceiver, it is her that they carry, and a pack of dogs runs with them. A dog, an accepted symbol of meaning. The meaning is also beneficial or advantageous, depending on which one or interpretation. The thing is, if you look for your own meaning or interpretation in every sentence, every verse, every chapter, and every parable or phrase, in the end, you'll end up with a pack of dogs. There should be a coherent, unified story where everything stems from one another, where one is a logical continuation of the other. Usually when this allegory is mentioned, people talk about a wolf pack. By the way, that's why Vysotsky sang about it. Do you remember the wolf hunt? There is a wolf pack and there are dogs. You are indeed dogs, and your death is a dog's death. If hunters bring along scattered dogs, such as various and different types of dogs, then their hunt is already doomed to failure in their hunting activities. Moreover, look at what is behind you, in the background, and take a moment to observe. 2 ice rinks, one smaller and the other larger. People are having fun, playing various games. Some are skating, while others are competing and enjoying themselves. Yes, ice. This is a metaphorical way to refer to a vocalized consonantal text with the very same Masoretic vocalization that cannot be changed. The announcement is water. If we have declared this text once and for all and it cannot be changed, it is ice, frozen water. And so, from this Masarevskaya reading, the translations we use today have emerged, and all translations around the world stem from this reading. And it is through these translations, through this vocalization, that people engage, deriving some pleasure from it, essentially playing. This is indeed the only thing that can be accomplished from this text if we definitely remain with this less, more, two scrolls, one thicker and one thinner, made of parchment, with text on the parchment, and covered in ice. Here are these two rinks, actually, where everyone skates. And the allegory of the word is this bird. A consonant word. Throw out the vowels from it. You miss it and can't catch it. And if you add vowels, it is already trapped in a cage. In short, it's hard with the word. And so, in essence, there is a direct literal understanding from which the Masoret's vocalization is essentially made. What allegory, in a way, will you, so to speak, come up with for this? A bird trap, which is on the ground, is clearly depicted at the center of the painting, in the artwork. This is the very center, and prominently. This is essentially an allegory of the essence of what is taking place in its entirety. The hunters go there in order to successfully and efficiently catch the meanings of words not in the air, where they should be, but on the ground in a direct literal sense. And the surgeon, who is responsible for understanding, is to blame for everything, and who once killed this text, which created a direct reading and the associated Masoretic vocalization that created ice. And what is a cherub? Remember? This is indeed the mill. So here is this mill, only this time it's a water mill, frozen in ice. By the way, a funny detail is that when the disc rotates, its faces move simultaneously in all four directions, as well as up and down. Remember Jacob's ladder, where angels ascended and descended at the same time? Well, next to the wheel is that very Jacob's ladder. Here is the story that really emerges. And to indeed emphasize all of this and actually bring it together, look at the composition over there on the left. People who are trying to prepare something to eat, as you can see. The father of the family is seemingly and apparently dragging the very heavy table there. Nikki, whether a hotel or a tavern or perhaps something else, has a sign with a deer. By the way, the word for deer can be read in two ways. It can also mean heart. Whether it's the deer or the heart, with a slightly crooked sign, yes, yes, indeed. In this picturesque village, you will find a charming old church situated right next to the historic. And just take a closer look at what the deer has. This disc of Hervim with its corners and edges, whatever it was called back then in those days long ago, however they referred to me. This disc is both a deer and a heart, a truly remarkable and intriguing blend. There, a communal meal takes place in the church that feeds everyone in the community and nourishes them. But do you understand what the trick is? That the table is not where one should eat, but the table is being brought here, to the church, to the fire, where it is warmer. We eat not where we should eat, but where, for some inexplicable and mysterious reason or another, we will perhaps maybe light a fire. We go to church for answers to the questions that the church does not have. It is immeasurably distant from them. But that is exactly where we go to seek nourishment and guidance, where we try to find all of this. By the way, you probably remember that joke about the drunkard who was looking for his watch under the streetlight, and when the policeman who approached asked where he lost it, he said, "Over there in the bushes." And when asked why he was looking here, he replied, "Well, it's brighter here." We seek answers where it is brighter, where it is warmer, rather than where those answers actually are. This is what Bruegel depicted in this painting, as you can clearly see, in the background and foreground. By the way, in fact, the fascinating and intriguing story about the deer was later adapted by the same Strugatsky brothers. Do you remember perhaps the hotel of the deceased climber, the crooked sign, the crucifix with a tilted crossbar? Christ is crucified up there on high. Indeed. So this is truly the lost mountaineer. The hotel of the deceased mountaineer is a place shrouded in mystery and intrigue, where the walls seem to whisper tales of the past. It tells the story of aliens, beings from another world, with technologies that are beyond human comprehension, who have found themselves under the control of a gang of fraudsters. These fraudsters, driven by greed and a desire for wealth, are only interested in extracting as much money as possible from the wonders possessed by these extraterrestrials. Any attempt by the aliens to escape this dire situation leads to their deaths, as the fraudsters are ruthless and will stop at nothing to maintain their control over these unfortunate beings. So this is indeed a story about a church, about an accommodation of a deceased mountaineer, where in fact extraterrestrial technologies are actually hidden. A story about the workings of the brain, a story about the structure of the universe. I speak about this with complete confidence because I am not just attempting to decipher it. I have already deciphered much of it, and it has become completely obvious and clear what it is about. And now these extraterrestrial technologies are currently at the church's disposal. But they do not understand these technologies. They simply use all of this for the banal purpose of making money. Well, they graze sheep in the lush fields, and sometimes they carefully shear their wool. This is such a wonderful picture by Bruegel. But there is hope in this painting. It is the patch of thaw that is hidden deep within, at the bottom of the canvas. A protalina is typically a patch of land that is naturally free from ice and snow, where something is often even trying to grow in such areas, in these conditions. This is the clearing. This is the consonant text, the original, the source consonant text. All it takes is to return to it and try to understand the meaning of the names, to compare them with other myths, and from this, a colossal picture emerges. But only the hunters pass by this clearing and go there towards the ice rinks. And all this great and fascinating story naturally leads us to the intriguing Tower of Babel. By the way, it is also in Solaris. Here it is, the promised Tower of Babel. But what is on it? The Tower of Babel itself originates from the biblical text, specifically in the very first book of the Bible, which is called Genesis in Greek, Baitie in Russian, and Barashit in Hebrew. It describes how people decided to build a tower to the heavens at the very beginning. And they met there in the valley of Shinar and said, "Let us build a tower not of stones but of bricks." And they began to build a tower to the heavens. And God looked upon it and came down and said that you will not succeed in building the tower. And he confused the languages of the builders, and they stopped building the tower. What is the conversation about? Why did they not use stones? Why bricks? Yes, bricks are certainly more convenient. Thus the answer is there, in the very biblical text, and it will be encountered repeatedly. The stone with its uneven shapes represents a natural concept, the words of the language we speak, infusing them with meaning, while the brick, a hewn stone, is a definition, a term to which we try to assign a clear, unambiguous meaning. Remember, in Exodus, when God indeed gave Moses the very 10 Commandments, he further stated that when you build an altar for me, do not make it of hewn stones, for as soon as you use your chisel on the stone, you will defile it. Use natural words to talk about meaning and significance and importance and relevance to ascend upwards to that higher place, into the sky. Because their meaning emerges in context. When the context appears, a common perspective on all of this suddenly gives each of them the necessary significance. Do not try to make a word unambiguous from the start. Initially, do not shape it like carefully hewn stones, for you will impose everything and defile the word carefully and precisely. And so the construction of the Tower of Babel is an attempt to build a tower to the heavens, to meaning, made up of definitions. From these terms, Let's proceed. But unfortunately, the higher you rise, the more it becomes clear that it is impossible to create any term, because terms will still be defined in relation to one another, and it will ultimately turn out that the same word, even one we have defined, will be understood differently by two people. This is why God mixed the languages of the builders. This is what it means, the same words, but people understand them differently. And the higher we climb, the greater this divergence becomes, making it impossible to complete this tower. Here, Bruegel depicts the Tower of Babel, which is constantly and continuously in the process of being built. Here it is down below. Here it is up there. Everything is trying to be built. Look, to the right side. In this painting, from the sea, a variety of materials from the world are constantly being brought in. New signs, new phenomena that are attempted to be laid into this Tower of Babel. However, the foundation of this tower is already eroded at the bottom. It has been washed away by water because it is impossible to build this tower from definitions on any foundation. We will always have to introduce terms without definitions, but it is these terms that will ruin us. And so, for all this, the biblical text indeed refers to King Nimrod, who is described as a great hunter. A definition, of course, but always a great hunter. A definition is simply comparable. It fits the definition, we include it. It doesn't fit, we discard it. How simple it is, the great hunter Nimrod. It was later said in the Talmud that when the Tower of Nimrod was being built, he was very, very careful with the bricks from which it was made. When people fell from the tower, Nimrod only smiled in a sinister way. When bricks fell and shattered from the tower, tears welled up in Nimrod. Of course, the definition values the integrity of the brick. The definition and meaning of a person are completely unimportant to him. And now, look at the main thing in this painting. Here in the corner, this is none other than King Nimrod himself. Here he comes, and all the community members pray to him, all those who create these definitions. They fall to their knees, prostrating themselves before him, because for them he is the greatest of the great, the King of kings, the one who creates everything that can be created, and he is accompanied by a retinue. Definition. Remember the ball in which the thief was sitting. Definition. It is always drawn as something round. It arises from averaging. We see phenomena in various different and diverse forms. We average, and this tiny little ball of averaging will be the definition with its boundaries. And here come his companions, these ones with round faces. This is yet another allegory of those definitions that always walk in the light of Nimrod. But all of this would not be so truly wonderful, and this painting would not be so absolutely great, if it did not indeed have a magnificent continuation. The fact is that indeed Peter Bruegel the Elder simultaneously depicted two Towers of Babel. The second may not be as well known because it is, let's say, visually more modest, but at the same time it is absolutely unclear. And most importantly, it is unclear why there was a need to depict two towers at the same time. Here is the second Tower of Babel. It is still undoubtedly not completed to the heavens, and it truly remains in a dismantled state. But what exactly did Bruegel really want to say with this second Tower of Babel? Why was it truly needed in addition to everything else, in fact? Actually, what was the purpose? And here we come to one very fundamental idea indeed. Do you remember how the film begins? The one with Munchausen? When Munchausen tells a tale about hunting a deer, forgetting his bullets, loading his gun with a cherry pit, shooting, and then encountering a deer with a cherry tree blooming on its head? Everyone laughs at the Baron, but then the very deer with the tree on its head comes out of the forest. But this is indeed the famous story of Baron Munchausen. Oh, what exactly is it about? It is about how, if a phenomenon suddenly shows signs of both a tree and a deer, the definition goes crazy. It doesn't know what it is. In his time, the allegory of definition for the Greeks was Diogenes, that philosopher, remember, who lived in a barrel in Pythos. Well, This barrel represents the boundaries of definition, which, by the way, he loved dogs very much. Now you understand why. There's a lot to say about him, and I'll provide a link below the video. I have a separate story about Diogenes. It's absolutely wonderful. I'm talking about Diogenes, not the story, although the story is also quite good. And there was one of the stories about Diogenes that he walked around during the day with a lantern, searching for a man, the ideal person, as he said. A definition always seeks the ideal image of a phenomenon, that is the very averaging, and it's key to show the most important features. Here it is, the lantern of Diogenes. And one day he was walking, searching and searching, when suddenly he saw a man dressed in a lion's skin. And he almost went mad, almost to the point of madness, insisting adamantly that he take off that lion's skin. So this is indeed similarly the same story about the deer and the cherry pit. In fact, the definition goes crazy as soon as it sees different signs. There is a huge problem with definitions in general, and the most important aspect of this problem is that a definition sets a boundary, and there will always be those who find it. Phenomena that fit a certain definition, but in reality do not represent those phenomena in meaning. Conversely, those who do not fit the definition, and yet we always associate them with this phenomenon in any conceivable way, in meaning. And this applies to any definition. In mathematics, this was later formulated as Gödel's two theorems of incompleteness. And this is an inevitable and essential property. In its time, the Talmud, in a beautifully articulated manner, related this to the phrase that a white spot on black skin, just like a black spot on white skin, is always a sign of illness. This ancient wisdom, by the way, as you may know, this leads to the emergence of the most famous yin-yang symbol with these little dots, which specifically refer to this. Now take a look at the Tower of Babel. Its main problem lies in those very points, on the white skin, on the black. What will you see if you take a closer look? On this tower, there is a white repair that goes through all the floors, and it is important to note that there is a black repair that also goes through all the floors in a similar manner. What does this say? This is significant because it indicates that this definition has two troubles, a white trouble and a black trouble, essentially. They are somehow trying to repair it, but unfortunately, somehow without any success, because the repairs are taking place simultaneously on all floors and are still not finished. This is indeed a retelling of that very ancient and well-known midrash, the same story from the Talmud that is often referred to in many discussions and teachings throughout history, stating that a white spot on black skin and a black spot on white skin are always signs of illness, and all of this together as it is. The presence of this text, the presence of misanthropy in this text, the condemnation of that original sin, and the attempts to understand everything literally. The presence of a church that insists on a singular way of reading, the existence of authority that always wants to build a vertical structure, that very Tower of Babel, because it is very convenient to live in this Tower of Babel, as there are no other opinions, because there is only one correct view, one ideology, and that's it. Everything is neatly defined, and it's generally good, allowing one to relax and not think while thinking is necessary. Moreover, there should be debate. Competition of opinions is essential, all of this. It leads to the conclusion that we live in an inverted world. Bruegel called it the world upside down. Another name for this painting is here. These are Flemish proverbs, or rather Dutch proverbs. In this particular painting, he took various different proverbs and depicted each and every one of them quite literally. This is indeed the kind of literalness in which we live today. We take the texts of myths, the texts of fairy tales, and perceive them literally, not trying to find allegories behind them, or at least searching for ones that are so primitive and banal, not realizing that all of this is a colossal system of storytelling about the same thing, just as Peter Bruegel the Elder's painting tells about it, looking at it from different angles, and so the world is upside down. The painting is so immensely colossal that a complete analysis of it will truly take several hours. let's at least go over some of the main points. Look, here are the brave knights who are indeed courageously trying for some reason to tie a bell to the cat. Well, the proverb itself, yes, indeed, tying a bell to a cat is a somewhat foolish action, because how will the cat catch mice after that, right? The proverb, which is well known and often cited, refers to a tale about how the mice gathered together in a meeting and decided on a plan to deal with the cat that frequently catches them. "Let's tie a bell to the cat to warn us of its approach," said one of the mice. And everyone shouted, "Of course we will know when he approaches." And only one little mouse said, "Excuse me, but how are we going to tie him up now?" Well, nevertheless, the absurdity of this phrase is clear. Here, a bell is literally tied to a cat, after which it will no longer be able to catch mice. It does not remind one of the vocalization of this text. If we add sound to this text, which is currently silent and straightforward, it will become as useless as a cat with a bell, because the sound would distract from the message. But just simply look and observe carefully at who exactly is indeed doing this. And it is indeed the knight who is indeed doing it. Bound in armor, this definition does just that. The literal understanding of language is the Lord. And there is a symbol of this definition. Remember that little triangle, which is also always a knife in allegories. And he holds in his mouth that very knife, that very corner of literal understanding, which he holds tightly as if it were a symbol of his understanding. I will repeat it once more for clarity and emphasis, to ensure the thought is fully understood. A knife is certainly in the mouth of a person completely stifling any possible human sound of this text. By the way, as we proceed, here is the answer to a very famous and well-known saying that exists in the Russian language, which you might have heard before. Do you remember it? Don't eat with a knife, you'll be wicked. And when this happens, look what follows. A man appears banging his head against the wall, because as soon as you give this text its vocalization, it becomes impossible to understand. And all you can do is bang your head against a stone wall. And by the way, the literal and straightforward understanding of a knife, in fact, holding in hand that very knife of direct understanding. Take a look around. You'll see something amusing. Pigs sipping wine from a barrel. It's quite a sight. So this text, when it is unclear, when it is pronounced, its allegory is a pig. And by the way, it is precisely for this reason, as a matter of fact, that Jews and Muslims in particular cannot eat pork. They must safeguard this text in their minds and hearts. They must take it literally. They must carry it through the ages, but they must not know what is inside and what it actually tastes like. And here the drunken pig is undoubtedly the officially proclaimed text. And in this proclaimed text, both fire and water coexist simultaneously. Absolutely contradictory things are indeed depicted together. This is what is shown here. And at the same time, simultaneously, there are also two roles of this text, a thin one and a thick one. The thin symbolizes essentially the process of averaging, while the thick symbolizes a multitude of available options. If you only try to work with averaging, well, with a literal and fundamental understanding, then the allegory of this is essentially to gnaw on a stone column. And at the same time, what are you fundamentally trying to do, in essence? This text states that it is both God and the devil at the same time. I have a separate video about this devilish essence, about angels, because the devil is a fallen angel. These little corners on the cherub with eyes, these corners are also wings. They are the wings of angels. An angel is one way to understand this text, and the literal interpretation refers to the fallen angel, who is the devil. And there are attempts to connect and tame this idea. This is what those who work with a literal understanding of this text do in their interpretation and application of the text. Interestingly, a rather peculiar and amusing situation arises, wherein if you happen to own a sheep, you can easily shear its wool, but if you possess a pig, it is entirely useless to even attempt to shear it for wool. This particular proverb is vividly depicted here, and in an effort to search for some beautiful explanations while working with this pig. The biblical text describes how to cast pearls before swine, or throwing roses before swine, as it was in the Flemish proverbs. This is depicted here. Here it is like, and there is that very cherub who hides this text, a very ancient text. The red disc of the cherub. Remember the little drawing, right? This woman here, who is gently and carefully covering the old man with this blue cloak, ensuring it covers him completely, as the blue color, often associated with crows, was historically significant. Well, of course, this text is covered with a crow of allegories. And alongside all this, there is an amazing composition. Look closely. Do you see the person crawling on the ground, whose head is in a ball? You already remember that ball, and their backside is sticking out, with 2 legs, of which for some reason only one is shod. There is a scroll, this scroll of the Pentateuch, which is sacred for all Jews and forms the basis of the Bible. This text has 2 rollers. This scroll has 2 rollers, 2 legs, with the parchment initially only on one of them. Only one leg is dressed in something. When you see this one bare leg, it is always a reference to the scroll, such as, for example, in its original and initial position. And now look at what happens. There is indeed a consonantal written text, and everything we see is not the meaning of this text, but what is written without vowels allegorically. We see the backside of this text, while its meaning, its head, is now in the tender hands of the Church, which has surrounded it with a literal understanding that does not truly reflect the true meaning. Therefore, this little ball of understanding lies on its side, while this understanding, the literal understanding, crawls on the ground, trying to gather the mess that has spilled onto the earth back into the bowl. In other words, indeed, it essentially makes a concerted effort to gather together the single meaning that once existed in this bowl, a meaning which has now shattered into numerous separate interpretations, and now it tries desperately to meticulously grind it all back into a unified singular form, in essence, to give birth anew, but this is simply impossible. Because in a very real and literal sense, one always has to establish connections between entities or elements that cannot be literally connected. The essence is bread. You cannot reach for 2 loaves of bread at once if your hands are indeed short. But there is certainly indeed another understanding that goes far beyond the literal. And look, there stands a beautifully dressed young man, which is already now holding this very sphere in its hand. As you can clearly see, it is, one thing is certainly to look from the inside, and another thing is undoubtedly and absolutely to go outside. And when you go outside, you will see allegories, you will look at this text from the perspective of allegories, and at some point, you will manage to find an explanation where everything is harmonious, balanced, yes, in equilibrium. This is why this young man carefully and deliberately holds the sphere in such a way that it achieves perfect balance. This is the symbol of the meaning now found in this text. And the one responsible for the search for meaning, as we already know, is the cherub. This cherub, by the way, was described in the book of the prophet Ezekiel as if a wheel was within a wheel. The wheel, an eternal image of this cherub, is quite clear. Here is the disc of this scroll. Well, by the way, the chariot of the god Merkava was drawn by a quartet of cherubim. Well, it's clear. Here is the scroll, the chariot of the god. There is a roller that pierces this wheel. But just remember that, as we previously discussed, we talked about the roller, which we previously mentioned, symbolizes the tree in the middle of the beautiful garden, a literal and straightforward understanding. Therefore, for the cherubim, the literal and straightforward understanding of the stick inserted into the wheel always hinders the ability to grasp the meaning. This is depicted here. And what's indeed quite particularly amusing is that this stick is also, interestingly enough, a church. And this historically significant and culturally important church is once again depicted here as it is in the well-known proverb or saying, to glue a linen beard to Christ. That is, trying to make Christ, who is probably a symbol of the justice of this world, even more virtuous by adding a glued-on beard, creating some kind of additional image. This is what the church is engaged in. She is certainly adding a linen beard to this text, making it seem very respectable, presenting it as if here are the rules, the 10 Commandments. Look at how they are. And the fact that upon closer inspection, these commandments are certainly quite trivial if understood as they are, is not important. This is the essence of the church. You can spend hours and hours examining this painting, but just one final crucial detail. Remember the cherub that deceives us by always presenting the same thing as something different. Look, this is the crown of the king, and at the same time it is a jester. The jester's cap with these bells and different colors, various stones. This is indeed the individual who foolishly constantly deceives us, who sends us all these troubles of this world. Here he is depicted, and he even has a cap with different colors. By the way, what is he doing? In fact, he hangs over the inverted meaning with his bare backside, over that meaning which encompasses the entire world, actually. Thus, he elaborately describes the title of this painting, The World Upside Down, while cheating at cards. He cheats at cards in the painting because he is always a swindler, as he is known for his deceitful ways. But look closely at which 3 cards he threw out from the column: Ace, 7, Jack, or Queens. And how can one not recall the Queen of Spades here, where the basis was a 3, 7, and Ace? Right. Only then came the 3, the 7, and indeed the Queen. Look at that, the 7 and the Ace, how very close that is. 3, 7, Ace. By the way, what was Alexander Sergeyevich writing about? And why did the ace suddenly turn into a queen? And who was this Hermann, a German engineer, who had never played cards but really wanted to win? To win in such a way as to discover the true secret of the 3 cards, the true secret. So this is the definition that does not play itself, because it does not trust chance and wants to know the secret of the 3 cards, a secret known to an ancient old woman who once received it from Saint-Germain himself. What a great work, the Queen of Spades. I will definitely analyze it, definitely. What are those epigraphs that seem absolutely meaningless for each chapter? But when you understand their meaning, they suddenly start to shine like diamonds. And so, when he plays these cards, it turns out that he is sure he played an ace, but when it is revealed, it turns out to be a queen. Such is the nature of words. The nature of words that is in the definition. You are still defining it with words, with terms. But only when it comes time to check at the crucial moment. Instead of seeing an ace, you will find a Queen of Spades appearing before you, and then the definition will go completely mad. But just pay attention to the amusing fact that it is important to note that this rather cruel joke of substituting paintings is indeed played on Hermann by none other than the very cheetah cherubin, also known as the Queen of Spades, and as it is well known, as it is said in the story by the famous author Pushkin, a symbol of secret malevolence. Look here, Bruegel's paintings. We have only discussed a few. They are all like this. It suddenly turns out that we unexpectedly and surprisingly saw some fascinating and modern anecdotes here, interesting references to films and to Pushkin. The world is incredibly closed off to us. The world is incredibly structured in a way that is highly structured, and you do not yet even remotely grasp the scale of the matrix in which we live. And to at least slightly touch upon these scales, remember this detail, that actually Peter Bruegel the Elder implies that there is a Peter Bruegel the Younger, And there is also Jan Bruegel. Peter Bruegel the Younger, a renowned artist, is his son. And Jan Bruegel, also an artist, is the younger son. Peter Bruegel the Elder is nicknamed the peasant painter because he depicted many people with strange faces. Peter Bruegel the Younger, also known as hellish, and Jan Bruegel, known as heavenly. It's moderately amusing indeed, but the point is that there are three main characters in this particular biblical story that the Church recognizes as the key figures in the whole narrative. Do you remember who they are? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Bruegel, the elder Bruegel, the younger, Bruegel Paradise. And look, right there, you see, there is this scroll that is at the heart of it all. He has a thick roller, and then there is certainly also a thin roller that gets everything from it, all the parchment and the page between them, and this page, on which the text is written, has always been called Pardes, the Paradise Garden. Jan Bruegel was often called Paradise because he was the renowned artist who mastered the style of painting paradise landscapes and specialized in it, and was highly celebrated for his work. And there are two figures who are the same, so there is Peter there and Peter here. Only one is the elder and the other is the younger, father and son. And the parchment slowly, steadily, and carefully moves from the thick roller to the thin roller, completely copying it. Peter Bruegel the Younger was notably involved in copying his father's works. This was the main thing he was engaged in. By the way, he copied the very painting, The Upside Down World, as many as 20 times. There is this division between the two rollers. I already mentioned, remember, that on the thick roller there is a lot of variety, a variety of options, which is also called space, context, while the thin roller represents the very averaging. By the way, this is the tree in the middle of the garden. A literal understanding, truly, a literal understanding of the will of suffering is hell, which is why it is hellish. And when he copies the inverted world, he cannot restore it. But he copies it 20 times. Because literal understanding, like that mirror, gives you a huge number of these false reflections, false mirrors. And in order to win, one must break all the false mirrors. Yes, but we have already drifted into a very famous film. This is how the story about art turned out. If you found this story interesting, I highly recommend watching another video, the link to which I will provide in the description. This is a truly fascinating story about the incredible Leonardo da Vinci and his undoubtedly extraordinary works, which, believe me, are probably even more impressive than those of Bruegel. In short, the world we live in is diverse, but it is all a matrix. As Shakespeare said, the whole world is a stage. The man and woman are all certainly actors in it. So don't forget about this, and thank you for your attention.